Welcome to your Chapter 10 Part 2 video lecture. This one is conservation in agriculture, but we're also going to be talking a little bit about feedlots. Alright, your first question has to do with seed banks. What are they like, and where are they located? They're essentially living museums that keep viable seed of a wide variety of plants. It's a way to protect the biodiversity of plants. So, as we had talked about before, there's only one or two kinds of corn grown. Maybe the 15, 20, 30 other varieties of corn that are out there, they make sure they keep the seeds here. Those types of varieties are called heirloom varieties. It just is a reference to other varieties of food-bearing plants that are no longer in vogue. What are the facilities like? They're cold and dry. Name 2 current locations of seed banks. Your book mentions one in Britain and also a couple in the U.S. One's at Colorado State University, and then the other one is in the state of Iowa. There's also one in Mexico. I believe there's one in Norway, but don't quote me on that one. But wherever it is that they are, they need to be cold and dry. All right, the next thing we're going to be talking about is feedlots, and I am going to be showing you a little bit of the video Food Inc. If you've already seen it, great. If you have not, it's kind of important for you to understand exactly where it is that your food comes from. Now, we in the United States and most places worldwide, meat has gone from a sometimes side dish to an all-the-time main dish. So it's become very important to produce lots of meat very quickly to meet demand and make a profit. So, how are feedlots different from rangelands? They are different because you use a lot less land, you've got a lot more animals in one place, and you feed the animals grain instead of the grasses most of them eat naturally. So, livestock are kept in close proximity and fed high-energy food to promote quick growth for harvest. They're also called CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. So CAFOs refers to the feedlots. What type of animals are kept in feedlots? Primarily it's pigs, chickens, and cows. So here is a rangeland here on the left, and then here are feedlots on the right. You can see cattle up top, pigs in the middle, and chickens on the bottom. All right, advantages. How are feedlots beneficial to the environment? I went ahead and put that on the previous slide. They use less land per animal, so you're not taking a natural habitat and turning it into essentially a livestock monoculture. It also can keep up with the demand for the meat, as I had said. Also, there's it lessens soil erosion that can occur due to overgrazing, which could happen here on the left-hand side. All right, so what are the environmental drawbacks? Water and air pollution, largely from the huge amount of waste these animals produce. Eutrophication, because that waste is loaded with nitrates and phosphates, goes into the water, plant growth, the whole thing, blah, 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 blah. And then also disease outbreaks among the animals. You have to think also you're feeding them, so you use that excess fertilizer and fossil fuel use and all of that goes into the grain to feed the animals. And then also, we're going to talk about this later. This is not in your book, but just keep this in the back of your head. Cattle produce methane and carbon dioxide because it doesn't agree with their tummies, what they're eating. And when we talk about things called greenhouse gases, remember that cattle alone, that type of livestock, is responsible for a large portion of what is introduced into the atmosphere. How can feedlots impact human health? You have disease outbreaks. There are things in the feces that can cross over and be a problem for people. And considering that these animals are usually covered in their filth when they're slaughtered, it can end up in the food system. Also, because these animals are in close proximity, they're often given what are called prophylactic antibiotic shots. Prophylactic means preventative. So they are given antibiotics to keep them from getting sick. And what that does is it ends up, the way that pests can develop a resistance to pesticide, bacteria can develop a resistance to antibiotics. So that means that the things that make us sick, you go to the doctor, you get antibiotics, you get better, those antibiotics are starting to not work anymore. And it's because we are essentially creating what are called superbugs through the use of antibiotics in our organisms, in our livestock. All right. Also, you may not think about this, increased pressure on fish populations. We take a lot of our fish and feed it to our cows and pigs and chickens. And then also, I'm kind of skipping around with your questions. You'll have to forgive me. I'll get to the ethical objections to feedlots in just a second, but from a thermodynamic perspective, how is eating meat a less efficient use of land than relying on a vegetarian diet? Typically, only 10% of calories transfer from trophic level to trophic level, so you have to raise lots of grain to feed the livestock, to feed humans, rather than taking the same calories that are in that grain and then feeding it to humans directly. All right, and then of the animals listed in your book, which is the least efficient at converting feed into meat? That would be cattle. Which is the most efficient? That would be chicken. And then about how much of our current global grain production goes to livestock consumption? 45%. Almost half of the grain that we grow goes to meat. And when we start talking about things like poverty, the poor usually cannot afford to get that meat. So one way, we're growing enough food to feed everyone. It's just kind of going to the wrong places. All right, let me get back to the ethical objections because I wasn't going to put any slides up here of this stuff. What are some of the ethical objections to feedlots? It's considered to be cruel to have these animals packed into a one location and essentially not being able to move, sitting in their own filth until they're large enough to slaughter. And then also some, because they don't like this, there are some body modifications that have to take place sometimes. As an example, chickens have to be de-beaked. Their beaks are sliced off of their faces so that they don't peck each other to death because they're so close together. And so that is an ethical objection to, some ethical objections to feedlots. All right, next we're going to talk about aquaculture. One of the top 3 organisms grown via aquaculture, I have pictures of them here. In the upper left-hand corner, it's fish. Those are tilapia. In the upper right-hand corner, those are oysters, a kind of mollusk. Remember, mollusks are bivalves. Bivalve, 2 shells. So that would be things like clams and oysters, obviously, and then also mussels. And then there on the bottom, the third category is aquatic plants. So fish, then mollusks, then aquatic plants. Believe it or not, most shrimp that we have right now are wild caught. All right. What are some of the benefits of aquaculture, especially when compared to commercial fishing? It's a reliable source of protein on a small scale. Individual families don't have to keep very many fish in order to harvest them because they do grow quickly to eat on a regular basis. Excess fish can be used as fertilizer. They are actually used as exactly this by Native Americans here in the United States. It lessens pressure on wild fish stock. As we saw in the commercial fishing chapter, we won't be wiping out the wild-caught fish anymore because we'll be able to grow this on our own. It lessens the possibility of bycatch. Remember, the problem with all of the commercial fishing techniques is you inevitably end up catching things that you don't want to catch. Less use of fossil fuels. Yes, there's stuff involved with the pumps and stuff, but it's not nearly what's involved in a commercial fishing vessel. And then it's more efficient in terms of energy in and calories out, that system. All right, disadvantages, of course. From a human perspective, fish raised on fish meal and oil can become contaminated with toxins, such as PCBs and dioxins found on the ocean bottom. You don't know what PCBs and dioxins are, just know they're not good. So when you feed them wild-caught stuff, that's a problem. However, captive fish are often fed grain, so they're fed a diet different than their quote-unquote normal diet, and that can influence the quality of the fish meat. Use of pesticides and antibiotics. The pesticides are used to prevent things like fungal growth and algae growth there in the water, and then antibiotics, because again, animals that are jammed together all the time without the large ocean water to stay clean, and then also the other organisms that would naturally clean them. They're going to get sick, they're going to use antibiotics, and that in turn influences humans because we start being exposed to diseases that no longer can be treated by antibiotics. As an example, you get strep throat, no big deal, you got your 10 days of antibiotics, you're done. There are now examples of, I don't know necessarily strep throat, but of other normally not a problem diseases that are no longer reacting. Their antibiotics don't make a difference, and so people are dying of things that never used to be a problem 20, 30 years ago. When you have aqua systems, remember fish move around a lot, so you have production of waste that stays in one area. And when I show you one of the methods of aquaculture, I can go ahead and show you exactly what I mean in terms of the waste staying in one place. Monoculture issues, whenever you only have one type of organism in one place, one disease comes and can wipe out the entire thing. Again, they may be fed wild-caught fish, so does it really take pressure off of wild-caught fish? Not always. And then escapees, because inevitably there will be escapees, can become invasive. So they can disrupt the food chain and then take over niches from native organisms. Let's see if I hit all of that stuff. Oh, they can also spread disease to native species. Okay, so two ways to do aquaculture. There's on the left, which is you basically take a giant net, put the fish in it, stick it in the water, the natural water. And the pros to that are it's a lot easier to stay clean. You don't have to worry about pumping oxygen into the system because it's the ocean. The downside is, again, that's where the waste kind of gathers in one area. That's what I was talking about. There on the right, they're basically giant aquariums, and they're being used to raise the fish. And here are two more pictures for you of aquacultures. All right, this is not one of the things that's in your book, but you actually can have polycultures with aquaculture, which is where you cultivate other organisms in there with the fish, things like shrimp and mussels that help to naturally keep the water clean and then also help to naturally keep the fish clean. If you've ever seen Nemo, you have that little shrimp, the cleaner shrimp that comes out. That can be used for them. And then also, again, they eat the fish waste. This has been done for centuries in Southeast Asia, and so not only does the system kind of take care of itself, you now have 3 things to sell at market instead of 1. So again, environmentally friendly, more money. And if you're going to do open ocean aquaculture, choose herbivorous fish, which means things that eat plants. Raising carnivorous fish can contribute to overfishing of their prey. Let's see. Next is sustainable agriculture. And this is something else we're going to talk about in class. Eating less meat is probably the way to go. I know some of you are not on board with this, but when you eat less meat, you're going to have less feedlots. All right, so sustainable agriculture. Sustainable agriculture is you essentially do not deplete the soil faster than it can form. What methods are a part of sustainable agriculture? No-till, lowered use of fertilizer, pesticides, growth hormones, water, and fossil fuels, integrated pest management, use of genetically diverse crops, polycultures, and all of the farming techniques that we talked about in previous sections. And studies have been done and shown that although yields may be a little bit lower, farmers are saving money because of what they're not using. And quite frankly, organic crops have a higher market value. Farmers who engage in the sustainable agriculture inevitably end up using what are called organic methods, which we're going to talk about in a second, and then they can go ahead and charge more for the same stuff when they get to the store. And biggest way for us to shift towards sustainable agriculture is education. Always a really good thing to do. And then also subsidies. If you convert to a more sustainable method of farming, we will pay you X amount of dollars. And promote urban gardens. We actually have a garden at Lakes Park that you can rent a little plot of land to go ahead and grow your own stuff if you can't do it on your own. And then also support locally grown food at the farmers markets, of which we have quite a few in our area. Inevitably, the food tastes great, and it's better for you because it's being grown in season with methods that are not going to be an issue. Then let's see what else. I probably need to talk about this in class. We've talked about growing perennial crops, which means you plant it once and then you keep harvesting things off of it forever, rather than growing what are called annual crops, which is you put them in, they produce, they die, and then you've got to go replant later on, because the root systems are a lot better. Let's see, what is organic agriculture? There's lots of debate. You need to look at the list on page 286 of your textbook, table 10.3. Those are the national standards for organic agriculture. Please realize that it is not an exact word. You have to be very careful to look for that national organic seal when something says it's organic, because it can simply claim to be organic without it actually being backed up. The terminology, like 100% natural, doesn't mean anything. Rattlesnake venom is 100% natural. Nobody is buying it at the store to consume. So please, it's on you to look at the list on page 286 of your textbook, table 10.3, so that you can recognize what organic agriculture is and is not. What are some of the requirements for organic crops and livestock? Again, look at page 286. Do realize that these are national requirements. States can make requirements for labeling something as organic stricter. States like California have done that. All right. Again, that's all right there. For those of you who are interested in exactly what organic means, there is a link for you so you can learn more about that on your own. Not necessary for the course, but we are talking about the food you're putting into your body, so you may want to actually do a little bit of research as to what it is that you're consuming. All right. What are some of the economic benefits of organic farming for farmers? Lower input costs. That means what you're spending on the farm is lower. Higher sale values and perennially fertile soil. You don't have to worry about your farm going dead in 3 or 4 years. And then from the science behind the story, how do organic farm fields differ from industrial farm fields? Their soil quality is 1,000 times better. Well, maybe not 1,000 times, I'm rounding up. But there's more nutrients in the soil, there's more biodiversity in the bacteria in the soil that helps to keep everything healthy, and also, just it's a better ecosystem, basically. And then how does supporting local agriculture lead to a reduced use of fossil fuels? If you are eating grapes grown in Chile, they're being flown here. They're coming by ship. All of those things require fossil fuels. If you buy something that the farmer 10 miles from here grew, it takes a lot less in terms of energy to bring you the food. And then also, you don't have to worry about it you don't have to worry about the food having to withstand the travel. Trust me, if you have never had a locally grown tomato, you do not know how tomatoes taste, because the tomatoes that you have in the store are grown to withstand transport. They are not grown to taste great. Definitely, at one point in your life, go to one of these little farmers markets or a you pick 'em place and taste food the way that it was meant to taste. And then how are these local agricultures an economic benefit to the community? Money stays in the community. Locals have jobs providing this food to the community, so you're not having to send your money somewhere else. It stays with your neighbors and in your local economy. And thus ends this particular section.